middle class. He was rich. He was rich. But at the same time, we see that Holy Gospel actually places a problem right there, yeah, that he was rich, and actually this is something that prevented him from following Jesus. This is something that actually prevented him from being happy. Yeah? Once again, Holy Gospel doesn't say today that money, possessions, all these things are bad. We just need to throw away today our service and forget about all these items and things and possessions. No. But Holy Gospel clearly is pointing out that there is danger. There is danger. Yeah? Like, when you have knife at home, yeah? Well, that definitely we all have, but it is dangerous, You are kids to play with this. And even when we are using, also sometimes we know that we can harm ourselves, accidentally. That is why you truly need to be careful each and every time when we take knife in our hands. Same as money. You need to be careful. Not so much just physically, but mentally, yes? So that, because while we are possessing some finance, we can be possessed by those finances we have. And this is the issue that young man had. This is not so much that he possessed this richness, but that richness possessed him and actually just prevented him from being happy. Because Jesus was not saying just go and sell everything you have, yeah? Because it sounds like a bit bitter. But Jesus was saying, Jesus was proposing himself instead of all this richness. Just imagine, maybe that young fellow would just listen to Jesus. Today, his name will be also known to us on the same level as Peter's and James and John and other disciples. But maybe nowadays you would be saying that there were like 13 disciples, but not 12. But well, that young man decided the other way, and actually he went sad. Well, and here we can say, well, God made him depressed, Well, it was not Jesus who made him depressed. Jesus wanted him to be joyful, but his attachment made him to be sad. That is why so often in our lives, this is not God that is making us anxious, depressed, but this is our attachments that are making us sad and depressed and all these things and angry and mad. That is why this Holy Gospel is not all about that money are bad, all our possessions are bad, cars, houses, pools, or whatever you name, but our attachments to them. Yeah? Even to the degree that we cannot be even attached to our neighbors. Yeah? Well, definitely we love our neighbors, our parents, spouse, kids, friends, and we are called to do so. Jesus is calling us to love our neighbors, but we cannot be truly attached to them. Yeah? We cannot really love them more than we love God. Yeah? This is an issue that happens so often with parents. When they attach maybe too much to kids, or maybe with spouses, or with friends. Yeah? Always in the first place should be God. Yeah? Because why? Just because if we place our God in the first place, only then we will be truly able to love our neighbors. Otherwise, when we place on the first place human being, at a certain moment when we are disappointed, with that human being, you might start to hate that person. And with God, you'll never be disappointed. That is why God will always be giving us strength to love. Because to love our neighbors, we need to have strength. Especially, we can testify this in marriages here. That we just require strength to love, to forgive. That is why we truly need to have our good Lord, who is our source of love, yeah? And to whom we come so that He can provide the ability to love. At the same time, once again, Jesus is just warning us about these attachments. And this is not just with regards to money. Jesus was saying, is giving to us that example because it is so obvious, It is so easy to understand, yeah? So easy. But there are so many attachments, yeah? Sometimes you have attachments maybe to some TV show. you know. And we value that we show modern prayer, maybe modern, time is the word of the Lord. Or maybe this is, our time on social medias, We can give up on prayer, on rosary, but we cannot really give up on social medias, And this is our attachment. That is why there are different forms of attachments here, and probably it would be not enough for us the whole day to name all those attachments. But Jesus is warning us, just be careful. And this is we who are called to recognize them. Yeah. When you go to confession priest, he has no idea, about our issues. Yeah. But that is why our good Lord is giving us conscience. Conscience. That is why our good Lord is giving us the word of the Lord, and why He is calling us to read the word of the Lord on daily basis, to listen while maybe we are driving, because the word of the Lord is mirror for us. And when we stand in front of mirror, well, we can enjoy all this here, and we can see our changes. We can notice what is wrong with us today. Maybe we need to fix something. Also, with the word of the Lord. When we take a deep look into this word of the Lord, conscience is giving us signs. What is wrong with us? What we truly need to fix. Because, we can lie to other people. We can say something that is not so much true, but we cannot truly lie to our conscience. Our conscience will tell us clearly, boldly, what is wrong with us. That is why we truly need to read the word of the Lord, because this is a mirror for our conscience, to be aligned properly, to be balanced properly. Otherwise, well, once again, if TV is our mirror, well, we'll be mirroring what we are seeing on our TV screens. At the same time, this is like this a ship, yes, that is anchored. Ship cannot really go on a trip if it is just anchored right there. We need to lift up that anchor. Yeah? Also with us, we cannot truly make a progress in our spiritual life when we have this attachment. Yeah? And well, once again, that is why we have these beautiful Fridays. Yeah? When church is calling us to keep fast. Why? Because fast is nothing but, it's all about detachment. We are trying to detach very basic, like food, because this is the first step. If we cannot truly be detached from the delicious, foods that we like, we cannot be detached from much more serious things, like hatredness, madness, anger, lack of forgiveness. We cannot. This is a very basic, like level one, and we cannot jump over that, because this is all about basics. If we cannot really handle the basics of the spiritual life, well, how we can be professional pilots in spiritual life? We cannot. That is why when we escape fast, we escape our spiritual perfection. At the same time, Jesus is saying to us that even if you do something, you truly need to keep in mind that we can do all in Christ only. We cannot really do much progress without relying on Jesus. Because Jesus was saying to the disciples here, because the disciples were asking, who can be saved? Because they were shocked. Because once again, from the mindset of the Old Testament, only rich people can be saved. Why? Because richness was a sign of blessing. Abraham, David, and many other, Reverend Job from the Old Testament. Yeah? All these righteous people, they were rich, and richness was a sign of blessing. That is why disciples, they were shocked, they saying, well, if rich person cannot be saved, and meaning that rich person is a blessed person, well, then who can be saved? And Jesus is saying to them, actually no one, if this is not something that is given to us by God. Well, once again, definitely this is a point that we can be confused, and probably the disciples were confused as well, because if we cannot really save by our own strength, what is the point? What is the point? But the point is to do our best. To do our best. And when God is seeing that we are doing our best, He will help us out. He will help us out. And this is like with our kids, you know. Maybe our kids, they have just, you know, $5, you know, and that's it. But you see that they use those $5 to buy ice cream, not just for themselves, but also maybe for sisters and brothers, and they giving up on themselves. Well, they'll give, you know, much more, because they learn a lesson to share, you know, to do their best. Also, with us, when Jesus is seeing that we just do our best, you know, to the best, you know, our abilities, He will provide. He will provide, because it will be not sufficient, you know, like for the child, you know, that is asking, yeah, will it be enough $100 to buy Ferrari? Well, not sure, yeah. But, you know, if that child is generous, doing their best, well, you might be able to help out. I'm not sure about Ferrari, but maybe some other car. Also with God, once again, when Jesus is seeing that we try to utilize our time in a proper way, when we use our gifts in a proper way, then He will bless us with wisdom and knowledge how to live this life. And most importantly, that Jesus is saying to us that I am your joy. I am your joy. Because that person, that rich fellow, he wanted to be perfect, he wanted to be with God, he wanted to be happy, but at the same time he was having that attachment, and there is a moment of confusion here, because he believed that he will be happy only with all those richness, but at the same time he gave up on Jesus and he gave up on happiness. Yeah, because he did not follow Jesus, he stayed with his possessions, but those possessions did not provide him happiness, because he left sad, as Holy Gospel says here. That is why whatever we have in our lives, this is not something that will be bringing to us joy. But God, you know, that holy decisions, sometimes hard, difficult, but if we have made those holy decisions, followed our heart, and even though life was not easy with us, but we were doing our best, at the end of our life, we will be having that sweetness, that nothing can steal from us, nothing. And even at the moment of death, we will be happy, you know, that we lived, you know, holy life, you know, to the best of our abilities. No one can steal from us this. But the other way, you know, the moment of death can be bitter for us, you know, because we just right knows that, you know, we just failed this life. That is why our good Lord Jesus is just reminding us today. Yes, He was reminding to this young fellow about proper decisions that we are making in our lives. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory.